gentlemen, thank you for the minutes. Can we have someone approve the minutes, please?
Move to approve.
Second?
So, Steve moved and Eileen approved. Okay, then?
Yep.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Steve Tupper. I think if you'd like to sit there, I should go over the camera a little. And we're a new committee. We started meeting in April. I think there was a sabbatical for about 2 or 3 years at least. So, any help you can give us in ADA compliance, and if we have big dreams, please let us know. But as you can see on our agenda, we're taking small projects and small steps, and what I want to bring to the committee is that we fix the door coming into the building, because you hit that thing and it's not working, so I'll have to find out. One of us can find out how that touch system can work. So thank you for coming, appreciate it.
So I'd like to give you a little bit of background about myself, what we do at the commission, and maybe discuss some of the things you're interested in.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So again, Steve Tupper with the Cape Cod Commission. I'm a deputy director at the commission, but I'm a transportation engineer by training. So UMass Amherst undergrad and master's. I'm a professional engineer focusing in transportation. So I've spent most of my time at the commission in transportation, but recently broadened it a little bit more with other infrastructure topics, climate change, and some other things as well. So I'll give you a little background on the commission in general, what we do in transportation, and try to highlight ways that we often help with local committees like yourselves. I know that you guys are an excellent volunteer group. You're all here out of your own goodwill trying to make the town better, and I really love to see that. So we're here to help in any way we can. So in short, Cape Cod Commission is a regional planning agency for Cape Cod. We're funded by an excise tax from transactions, real estate transactions. That funds a lot of our work through the Cape Cod Environmental Protection Fund. So the services we do to the towns are generally without charge. So these small sort of things happy to go and help out with. If you guys are thinking a much bigger project, there's other funding sources to get us involved with this branches through the state and things of that nature if you're thinking about something a little bit bigger. But something small, if you're looking at an intersection, you just need a little insight, happy to help out with little facts like that. We work regularly with your DPW director. I know Lynn Cooper was here at a prior meeting, so I meet with him frequently, and I'm always happy to help out with small tasks. At the commission, we have about 35 staff in total. So transportation is one aspect. We also have water resources, historic preservation, economic development, a whole range. A lot of planners that do work with the planning departments in the towns. So I won't speak to all the other things we do, but certainly happy to. In transportation, we have 4 full-time staff and then interns in the summer. And we also have separate funding source, primarily through Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. So a lot of our transportation work is funded by other sources. Not important except that it does provide some structure in the way we do projects. So if you're thinking about a big project, we plan a year ahead for those. Good to know there's a cycle each spring where we ask the municipalities what sort of projects they're interested in and then put it in a formal work plan. So if you're thinking about a larger scale, there's a bit more of a process to get us on board, but not an onerous one that Mike is familiar with. So we can work on that. In terms of what we do in transportation, couple different categories of things that we do. The first I'll start with is data collection. So we have a pretty robust data collection program. That's actually how I started at the commission. I was an intern in the summer, sitting at bike trails, counting bikes, out on the roads, counting cars. So sometimes thankless work, but it really underpins everything we do. So we put a lot of effort into that. And it's a service that the towns use. Each year they let us know what projects they're working on, and we go out and collect the data for them. So if you're ever interested in if you're thinking about a road, you're trying to understand kind of what the usage is, something like that, that's something we do every summer. Happy to go out and do counts of vehicles, pedestrians, bikes, those sort of things. So that's a pretty big focus of us during the summer months when there's a lot of activity. So we do a lot of that work in terms of data collection. The next phase we do is a lot of the community outreach. So if there's an idea for a project, I think we may have given you a sense of some of the dollars involved in these transportation projects. $1 million a mile for a sidewalk. When you're thinking about those sort of investments, there's a lot of that early community outreach that's important. So that's what we often help the towns with. If they've got a problematic intersection, we'll run a series of public meetings, drop some concepts, and get some community feedback. It's great to know if we're on the right track and the town wants to keep investing and we look out for state and federal dollars. The community says, no, absolutely, that's an awful place for a traffic signal. It's better to find out then than after you put in a couple $100,000 in design. So we frequently help out with that. We've done that in a number of locations throughout Harwich, and we'll go through some examples later, but certainly we've done a lot of work in Harwich over the last decade plus. And then the final piece is the funding side, which I know, which is a lot of times the committees have great ideas, but it's matching the funding to actually get the things built. So first, I'll start by appreciating the comments about small projects. A lot of what I do has to do with $10 million projects, and those are big, complicated, and they take 5 or 10 years. They're important, but I think I'm most excited about some of the small projects, like small sidewalk gaps and things like that that can make a difference and that can move a little more quickly. So there's a couple of different ways those projects get funded, but in general we help the towns identify the best funding sources for each of the projects that get identified. We also work closely with the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority. So a lot of the sidewalk, bicycle, pedestrian projects relate to public transit. So we found that one of the biggest barriers to using the transit service is actually physically getting to the bus stop. So a lot of the focus we have is trying to make those little connections. So if you're ever looking at a project that ties into transit, it opens up a whole other world in terms of funding. So certainly something to think about in terms of implementation. And then I'll just touch on a couple major categories of funding that we often work with communities on. And then certainly want to hear from you, and we can get into detail on any of them. So I believe Wink mentioned the Transportation Improvement Program. That's the biggest program that as staff we administer. We are staffed to a group called the Cape Cod Metropolitan Planning Organization. I know I'm throwing out a lot of terms here, so I can certainly circle back. But that's a regional body that we staff, made up of representatives from federal, state, regional, and local representation. And essentially they vote on where the federal funding for transportation goes in our region. So we get a chunk of money on the order of $10 to $11 million a year for roadway bike path projects, a little bit more on the transit side. And they make the decisions about which projects get funded. Those projects are generally larger in scale. We're talking about at least $2 to $3 million up to $20+ million in at least 5 years to design them. So you're talking about bigger projects, and often design requirements that can be a challenge, just to be frank. So if you're talking about a small project where you really have a very specific solution in mind, that might not be the best path. If you're talking about a whole new intersection redesign, it might make sense to go big on something like that, because there's a lot of dollars available, but there's a lot of barriers along the way that Link's certainly experienced over the years. But that program also funds some of the things that are happening in the community now, like the Safe Routes to School project just down the street at the elementary school is funded through that avenue. So good to see that project. I know the sidewalk project down on 28 connecting to Sacramento Harbor, that's going to be a great one connecting up there. So another example. And then further down on 28 heading from Harwich into Dennis, project down there. So those are some of the bigger projects that we see in the tip. Now some of the smaller things don't make sense to go that route just because of the logistical challenges and the time associated with it. There's a lot of other grants that kind of pop up here and there, and those are ones that Harwich has actually been really successful at going after. So certainly we've helped out with some awards. Sometimes they go on and on their own, which is great. They have the capacity to do it here. So things like Safe Streets programs, things like Complete Streets, which isn't quite ready for yet, but some of the other programs. And some other safe spaces. There are a lot of small grant opportunities that we help connect with. And then finally, there's a lot of things that happen locally. I know that there's a lot of demands for town funding, so I know town doesn't always get to spend everything they'd like to on transportation, but sometimes the town just goes and does their own projects, which is great. They have all the control that way if you do a local project. So again, depending on which project, different categories may make sense in terms of funding those projects. Probably a good point to pause. I don't want to overload you with too much information, but happy to go into any of those areas in more detail.
Could I ask, is there something, we're a relatively new committee. Are there some, Link told us about some of the roadway stuff, but are there other things that are sort of pending right now that you're aware of for the town of Harwich that I certainly don't know about, but are there some things coming up? And as I've gone on the internet to try and get educated about these kinds of things, there were some things that other towns had done, not necessarily in this state, particularly about trails. You know, we have a few walking paths and trails and those kinds of things around here. And I don't know what condition they're in. You know, some of these have, you know, that as I've walked around, have some perhaps would be difficult for all people to access. Do you have anything that's pending right now for the town itself?
Yeah, so certainly trails are an important part of the pedestrian network, and where there's issues with accessibility, I don't have to tell you guys this, but it can just be a very small, localized point issue that then makes the whole network inaccessible. So in terms of trails, Mass Trails is probably the most popular grant opportunity a number of towns have benefited from. And I also know Link is working directly with Mass DOT, and I'm not sure where they're in the process right now, but looking at the condition of the Old Colony Rail Trail, thinking about what can be done there. So I assume he touched on that a little bit.
He didn't while he was here, but he has in front of the selectmen and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the most exciting thing in my mind, because I do a lot of path development, new paths, but I don't want the existing ones to get forgotten. So I live down the street in Brewster and use the Cape Cod Rail Trail all the time, and maintenance is important.
Yeah.
You've got the route issues and you've got the connections, so I think that's something that's probably the most near-term thing in terms of developments on the paths themselves.
I was thinking about, you know, having driven by the trail that's right down the street here, and whether or not that's accessible or not. To take it, but I haven't taken the walk down there to see what it's like.
And we did just complete last year an inventory of all of the road crossings, of the rail trails, or the trails across the across Cape Cod. So if you just look on our website, it's called the Trail Crossing Inventory. And there's actually a map that shows all the locations, and here's an evaluation of whether or not they're up to standards. We didn't go to the full level of ADA standards, just given some of the very specific things, but we just generally looked at the condition, whether there was signage present, what sort of high-level things were lacking. So we presented that to all the DPW directors. So we can take a look at that and use that to help prioritize future grant opportunities. And then this next coming year, we're going to be replicating that for side paths. So right now we did the major things like Cape Cod Rail Trail, Shining Sea, some of the major paths. And then we're going to replicate it for some of those like wide sidewalks that function as paths. I'm trying to think of any good examples in Harwich. I don't know, they come to mind. In some communities, that's an important part of the network as well. So we'll be looking at that as well.
When you were talking about the Old Colony Rail Trail, is that a rail trail here? I'm just used to Cape Cod.
So the naming conventions can be, so the Cape Cod Rail Trail technically goes down into Harwich and then turns at the roundabout.
Right.
So I think I'm talking about the spur heading down to Chatham.
Okay.
So slightly
I know
different names.
exactly. That goes down to the airport.
Yes,
Yeah,
correct.
I live right there, so that's the Old Colony?
Yes.
Oh,
Technically
I
what they
just
call
thought it
now.
was always all
Did I get that right? Yeah, Old
Cape Cod Rail
Colony,
Trail.
OCRT, yeah.
Oh, for God's sake. Okay.
So it's called different things.
Let's see what-
Either way, an important segment.
Yeah, that's,
What else we doing on trails? I know DPW with some grants from the county is working on some of the crossings, particularly installing some new safety equipment that Link may have mentioned as well, at Headwaters and then down at Depot in South Harwich. So certainly, overall, Harwich in particular has done a great job of upgrading the crossings. So looking kind of regionally, Harwich has been a leader in making sure those are up to standard in terms of safety. One of the things that we're thinking about, maybe to take one step back, one of the big efforts we do every 4 years is a regional transportation plan. We look at kind of high level, where's the region and what are priorities going forward. I think we're well established in terms of our trails, in terms of developing connections. There's still a lot to be built, but there's kind of planning efforts underway. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is what are the connections from those trails into the communities. So it's important to have that spine, and Harwich kind of has that down with the rail trail, but making sure that then they can get to the important areas in town. Out here, you're pretty fortunate. It's pretty easy to get to Harwich Center, but if you're thinking about going down to Harwich Port, areas like that, it's more challenging.
and you're going down Main Street.
Yeah, so I know I've been in discussions with town in the past about those connections. So those are some of the things we're gonna be looking at in the coming years, on one of the important connections to kind of major destinations for communities.
And that's a similar cost to sidewalks, $1 million a mile, give or take?
That and then up.
Yeah.
The challenge typically having to do with, is there enough right of way to fit it in?
Yep.
And not knowing the specifics, I'm assuming that's the case on Bank Street and
Yeah.
all of the other north-south roads.
Right.
But yeah, certainly we're talking about $1 million a mile up, right?
Yeah.
If you're talking about a traffic signal, you're starting at $3 million.
Yeah, people don't understand all the steps that you have to take, and that adds to the cost.
Yeah, it certainly does, the steps and the time and the cost.
Yep.
And I feel the frustration sometimes when there's this great idea and I go there and tell them it's gonna be 5 years before you can build it, but if you don't get started, you never get to the finish line. So
There you
I
go.
don't want to, I hate when that frustration ends up with just put your hands up. It's important to start, but ultimately you don't get to the finish line.
So we were trying to, when we first met, the first or second meeting, where should we narrow our field of study, if you will? Should it be sidewalks? Should it be road crossings? Should it be the beach? If you're talking, where do we begin?
Prioritization, that's probably the most important thing in what I do, because there's never enough money to go around for all the needs. So generally speaking, the way we often look at it is kind of two things. One is where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck, where are the most people using it, where you're gonna get the most benefit. But also where are the people that need it the most. So sometimes there's a section of trail that's not gonna be the most heavily used, but if it connects up to something really important or to an area where you know there's pedestrian activity, if you're trying to get to a senior center, a community center, if you're connecting up to a bus stop, even if it's not a heavily used one, providing that connection is really important. So in terms of Harwich, I don't want to overstep and tell you exactly where to work, but certainly some of the things you discussed there are things that are being worked on throughout the towns. Often we look at those usage things, then we look at safety data. That's a big focus on our end, is where are the most unsafe conditions and where is a sidewalk really warranted. I've got accused in the past of going out and pushing for sidewalks. I don't want to see sidewalks everywhere. I want to see sidewalks where they're needed and where they're appropriate. So we look at that, what is the demand and what is the kind of crash trends or what are the unsafe conditions that you see. So one thing that we've done in the past is done kind of a safety evaluation of where there might be needs. Certainly can help out on that front, looking at where there's been crashes or where there's conditions that are likely to result in crashes. So looking at the volume and speed of vehicles on the roadway and what sort of a combination there is. So if you see vehicle speeds of 40 miles an hour and higher, and traffic volumes of over, say, 10,000 vehicles a day, you're not comfortable walking on that roadway, and it's not safe to walk on that roadway. So those are the ones that we typically prioritize for looking at potential sidewalk installations. Then we get to the fact of whether or not it's feasible, whether there's space to build it there, what are the right-of-way issues, what are the environmental constraints. But generally, safety is where we start in terms of what the needs are. And there's actually a specific program, I don't know if Harwich is interested, some of the towns have been interested. The federal government's been prioritizing safety, and particularly a Safe Streets for All program. And that's something that there's currently a opportunity for the towns to apply for funding through that. And Cape Cod Commission's considering a regional application, potentially partnering with some local municipalities that are interested. And what that would do is, for this first round of funding for the Cape Towns anyways, would be developing a Vision Zero plan to look at a plan for improving the safety on the roadways with the ultimate vision of eliminating fatalities on the roadway. Certainly there's a lot of steps before you get there, but this program, the town would have to commit to that as the long-term vision, that you want to see zero fatalities, which generally towns are okay with that. It's hard to argue that you want anything but zero fatalities. But then there are some steps to make sure that you're committing to actually getting there. So it's not right for every town, but a number of towns are interested, and certainly be happy to talk with anyone at the town in Harwich about partnering on that regional grant. The application is due in early September. We have been reaching out to DPW and others in the town to gauge interest in that. It's not a whole lot in terms of implementation, so I don't want to steer you in that direction. It's not going to get you sidewalk segments, but it gets you the funding to do a sort of plan for that. So still that as another opportunity.
Steve, if we become aware of a funding source, would we speak to someone in Harwich government or speak to someone in the Cape Cod Commission?
So it's a good question. I'd say you could start in either direction. So happy to answer any questions directly if you find something you just want to say, hey, does this make sense for our community? And I can advise on that. Or certainly locally, they'll have a good sense whether or not it might be a feasible path. So we're never going to advocate for something that's not supported by the administration and by the agencies that would implement it. But we're happy to find information, and often we get that request from a number of towns. So usually it's easy enough to say, hey, here's, for example, Safe Streets for All. There is grant opportunities to actually build infrastructure, but none of the Cape towns currently have a safety plan that qualifies them for that. So that's an easy one. I can say, yep, you guys would have to go for this. This one you wouldn't be available for, and then you can take that to your local officials or DPW to discuss it further.
This one's specific to public libraries.
Public libraries. So that's a great one that I don't know much about.
It's just, it was announced, the application, the information won't come out until fall.
Okay.
It's not a huge program, but it looks as if the minimum grant is $10,000, and then it would go up from there. And the question is, we do have a list from 2018 of some access issues in Brooks Library, and the question is, are they really little projects? Are they below $10,000? The grant is directed towards small and rural libraries, and we qualify as small.
So with one like that, I'd probably start on the local level, because they'll probably have a better sense, but always, they know how to reach us as well, so if there's questions.
And it's done by, it's a federal grant, goes through the Department of Museum and Libraries.
It's good to know.
I'm sorry?
It's good to know.
Yeah, and the question is, is the need great enough to pursue it? And of course, it's, would be highly competitive. It's a national grant program.
Yeah,
But as you said, you don't try, you don't get.
and so what I usually do with those is look at, one, as you indicated, how competitive it is, what are the chances of getting it, and how difficult is the application, to be frank.
Yeah.
You're talking about staff time to put together an application. If it's a pretty low lift, then it doesn't hurt to put it in. If it takes a lot of time to prepare and it's not a good chance of getting it, that might not be the best allocation of resources. So I'm sure staff can look into that, but that's usually what I look at is what are the chances of getting it and how much work is it to prepare the application.
Yeah, if it's, if it seems appropriate and the staff is willing, I've had a fair amount of experience with government grants for libraries. So it's just, I just hate to see things kind of float by.
It's good to get those opportunities, and I'm well aware of the ones in the U.S. Department of Transportation, but other ones like that are great.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're not as well known, so there could be opportunities.
And I wouldn't know how to assess the cost of things that might need to be done. And I know they're going to want focus groups. That much was just in the wording. But, all right. Well,
Let's start locally, but then certainly we're a resource. I mean, if it's the infrastructure side, your DPW will have a good sense of the cost to do things. If it's softer stuff like focus groups, certainly that can help out.
yeah, and that I've done also as part of grants and
Excellent.
projects. So I'm a willing volunteer.
Now, are there, in just listening to what you're talking about, are there some, I had the sense that there are some projects, not underway, but somewhere in that pipeline from idea to execution. Are you have some that are ready for, or in the pipeline for Harwich? That, so that we could know, because we're just, you know, this is what, third meeting, fourth meeting, something like that. So, you know, we would like to feel, or I'd like to feel more confident about what's in the pipeline. Because if we're thinking about what to do next or what to focus on, if you've got something in the pipeline, that would be good. It also sounds to me like your, I don't know whether it's agency or your commission or whatever it is, my sense of, you know, getting grants and that kind of stuff needs people behind them to be kind of following the footsteps of, is it moving along or nudging it along or something like that, that, you know, is certainly more informational than I would have, to be able to go from, you know, an idea to actualizing the money and the work being done. Would you be that kind of conduit to help the town do that?
It depends on the grant opportunity. So to answer both questions really, if it has to do with anything with federal or state funding, we're kind of directly involved just by the nature of the way the organization's set up and the funding flowing through the Cape Cod Metropolitan Planning Organization. So if it's anything on that side, we're certainly happy to keep the towns up to date, and anyone individually can be added to our email list where we share updates on that, and we have public comment opportunities, which are great opportunities for local advocates to kind of put the word as the state understands where sort of the interest is. So in terms of keeping up with projects through those funding sources, certainly we're the place to go for that. I'll leave my card for those here, but CapeCodCommission.org, you can reach myself or Colleen Medeiros, manages our transportation program. So she is usually more intimately familiar with some of the specifics of the projects. So that'd be a good place to go if you have questions about anything through the transportation improvement program. Things that are happening more locally, sometimes we get involved in at the request of DPW, but there's certainly things going on that I'm not aware of. I don't need to be involved with things going on at the local level unless asked. So that would be more of a DPW role in terms of advocating for those sort of projects and where they are in the process. And I don't typically get involved again unless requested by DPW or by administration. So that's where the split is in my mind. Typically, it's where the funding goes, but that defines what our role would be.
We've had a number of discussions about access to our beaches and the like. Is that something that you follow through on or comes under your umbrella?
And since the last meeting, I met with the recreation director, so I have a lot of information that I have on our agenda after we leave, so before we put the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
Well, I'll leave you plenty of room to discuss that because I haven't done a whole lot in terms of beach access specifically in Harwich. That's one that's obviously a big topic, and given the number of beaches along the coast could be a big effort. So I've been involved in a couple of specific instances where there's been like a project, like in Brewster, we looked at all the Brewster beaches and looked at the feasibility of the shuttle to access the beaches. So kind of those standalone projects I get involved with. And then the only other way that I've been involved is a number of the communities have used a program we administer, the Cape Cod Bike Rack program, where we take some of that money from the transportation improvement program and then kind of pull it out to fund bike racks. We're just about done with our final round. I know the town of Harwich is actually going to get a couple of installations. I think at the community center for this round, Fix-It stations, which are the ones where you can take your bike and if you need to pump it up or do a little repairs. Great to have near the rail trail. So a number of towns have used those for bike racks like the beaches. So that's one thing. There's never enough parking at the beaches, so if you can do bike parking, that helps. But pedestrian access and safety of the pedestrians to the beaches is something that we hear in every town that I'm in. So I haven't really been involved in too much detail in Harwich, but certainly if there's an interest, we could spin up a project and look at it with the local officials. Those can be very challenging, as I'm sure you're expecting. The narrow right-of-ways on those roads, usually there's not a lot of room to work. So usually one of the more challenging ones we work.
Sure. Okay.
Big picture, the infrastructure national thing is being funneled through you guys. Do you anticipate that'll be the same the next time?
So in terms of the federal funding, at least on the Department of Transportation side, the authorization is for the next 5 years, so that's pretty stable.
Oh, okay.
So we have pretty reasonable expectations for funding for the next 5 years, and it's a pretty, it's kind of two sides to the coin. It was a good increase from the last set of funding that we had, so it's good to see about 20% increase in terms of funding for the region overall.
Nice.
On the flip side of it, costs have gone up around the same amount, so we didn't really make much ground. The inflation that you're seeing throughout daily life is trickling in terms of materials, in terms of labor, so probably not making a lot of ground, but at least not losing ground.
But the hoops you have to jump through are similar?
They're similar for the most part. I'll caveat that and say the latest round of funding had a number of discretionary programs that have a slightly different funding path. So like that Safe Streets for All program that I mentioned doesn't flow through the same path. It can actually be a direct federal grant to a municipality or to the county. So there are some of those direct opportunities to go from federal to local. It cuts out a couple of the administrative steps, but the burden in terms of the actual implementation falls on the local municipality. So I'm not going to suggest it's easier, it's just different. So if a town doesn't have a lot of experience administering federal grants, which Harwich has, so you're probably well suited there, there can be some additional priorities there. So to kind of paint a broad brush, if you're talking about federal or state dollars, there's a good amount of work. And that's not going to change. Although I'll say, there's a lot of caveats because things change very quickly. But some of the state programs that have come out recently, like the Safe Streets and Spaces for All, those are really focused on quick turnaround projects. The state did a really good job at lowering some of the burdens. I know town of Harwich was successful in one of those. I think it was in Harwich Center for sidewalks.
Yeah.
So some of those state programs have really tried to make them more early action, quick build, and lower some of the barriers. And importantly, put some of the design decisions locally.
Nice.
So that's where we've had some of the issues in the past, where the state makes the design decisions, and that's not always consistent with local desires.
Yeah, Lake described a couple of them to us.
There may be some battle wounds there, doesn't like Ave and others,
Nicely put.
but I'll say the state's a little easier to work with, frankly, than it was a decade ago. But there are still some standards that have to be met, and sometimes the state standards aren't consistent with local desires, and puts Link in a tough spot. So I don't envy his position there, but overall, the town of Harwich has done a great job of availing themselves to the funding that's been out there.
Just so, like you just said, the big picture. I just want to make sure I understand the pecking order. So the federal government has a cabinet member who's director of transportation, that's a good judge.
Correct.
Now, does our state have a director of transportation, and then it goes down? I don't know where the Cape Cod Commission comes in as far as transportation goes. It's confusing to me.
Not just you. It's complicated. So let's see if I can. So US DOT, Pete Buttigieg is up the top of the administrator. There's local offices in each of the states for federal highway. So there are local liaison in terms of what's going on the federal highway side. Now, federal funding almost entirely in the state of Massachusetts from the DOT side flows through Mass DOT, State of Transportation. And that's typically because they're providing the match. So most of the big roadway projects you see around here are roughly 80% federal funding with a 20% match. And then state administers those. So when you see work out on Route 6, Route 28, that's the state doing those projects, but leveraging a lot of federal money. Now, anytime federal US DOT dollars, whether it be Federal Highway Administration or Federal Transit Administration, comes to our region, it has to go through the Cape Cod Metropolitan Planning Organization. So that's that official mechanism. And to dig into that a little bit more, the Cape Cod Metropolitan Planning Organization has 2 representatives from Mass DOT, one from the Cape Cod Regional Transit Authority, one from Barnstable County Commissioners, one from the Cape Cod Commission, one from the Mashpee-Wampanoag tribe, and then regional representatives. So those are 6 town council members or select board members from across the state. So anytime that federal funding flows to our region, it flows through the MPO. So they say, yes, these are the projects that we want to see that federal money being spent on. Now where Cape Cod Commission staff gets involved. We are staff to the MPO. So when they're putting out these plans, we're the ones preparing them for the meetings, giving them the materials, and they ultimately are the decision makers. So we're doing that staff back end. We're putting the projects in some databases to get them funded, having to do the reporting side of it. So we're kind of the behind the scenes for the most part, but ultimately it's the MPO that makes those decisions. And then I don't want to overcomplicate it, but there's one more layer that's important here, is that the Cape Cod MPO has an advisory group as well, the Cape Cod Joint Transportation Committee, and that's all the DPW directors on Cape Cod, plus a bike representative, and they're the kind of boots on the ground technical experts that know about the projects. So Harwich has a representative on that group, so they review the materials before they go to the MPO. So they can say, yes, these projects are moving along, they're doing well, they're good things for you to vote to fund. And the Cape Cod Commission staffs both of those groups. So we're really intimately familiar with the details of the projects, we prepare all the meetings, we run all the meetings. But ultimately it's the MPO that makes the final decisions at the end of the day.
I don't know if I could repeat that.
Yeah, so
I
well
was
said.
with you.
You think you've got a problem with, I'm trying to take minutes.
No, not you.
So let me see if I can help you out here. So if you're interested in learning more, capecodcommission.org /transportation. We have everything that we do transportation wise. And if you're specifically interested in the transportation improvement program, which is the funding mechanism for a lot of this, there's actually a video on there now where there's a discussion with commission staff where we go over all of these things. It's rough, 5 to 10 minutes long. It kind of repeats some of what I said, but also highlights the projects. So if there's anyone who's interested in learning more, I'd say watch that video. It gives you a good overview of things that are going on. Hopefully without making it as complicated as I just made it. But it's up there. So capecodcommission.org /transportation to give you all those resources that I mentioned. I know there's a lot in my head sometimes. It's hard to get it up.
Does anybody know?
I didn't retain as much as you
Yeah.
told us about, but trying to write down the names of things.
Yeah, right,
You know,
me too.
making sure I have them.
Steve, you have any more questions?
The county does not really have an ADA compliance, well, you must have a compliance officer,
So we do in terms of our facilities, our
right,
local
just,
facilities.
but not available to the towns or anything.
No, we don't currently have a role where like we go out and do ADA transition plans for different towns. There are other regional planning agencies that have done that, so it's certainly a possibility. There are potential grant opportunities where you could apply for those ADA transition plans, and either staff at the Cape Cod Commission or a consultant could conduct those. There's certainly plenty of consulting firms that do them regularly, so I don't need to be involved in everything. Certainly consulting firms are
Consulting firms are private sector, so we would have to pay them.
You would have to pay them. They're often
You
grant
guys are free.
If we have
That's a
time,
big
we are
difference.
free.
You like that point?
You understand that? So I'll say, if you are doing an ADA transition plan, though, there are often grant opportunities to fund the consulting portion of it. So that would be a good thing to keep an eye out on at the state level.
Yeah, so if we ran something by you guys, and then if we ran into trouble, either organizing the documents or whatever, we could at least give you guys a call and see where it goes.
Yeah, we're certainly a resource.
Okay.
In that respect.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
I'm only a town away, so I know I dumped a lot of information on you, but if you have other things, always happy to come back to it.
And Link spoke very highly of you.
Very good. Well, I enjoy very much working with Lynn. He does a great job in town.
Yeah, we kept him here a little long last meeting. We had lots of questions for him.
Yeah, he's got a lot going on. He's doing a lot. So.
Link's very experienced and really, you know,
Mhm.
coming from the bottom up
Mhm.
with boots on the ground, yeah, makes a difference.
Thank you, Steve.
Questions? I'll leave my card in case you want to follow up.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
And nice to meet another UMass alumni.
There you go.
I was political science, not PE, but
Either way, you get the degree.
did you enjoy it?
I did. I did
Good
very much.
education.
It's a big school.
Yeah. If you just, it's like any place else, if you avail yourself of the education, you're gonna do good. If you avail yourself of the partying, maybe not so much.
I didn't have time for that, so it was all good.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, have a good afternoon.
Wow. Whew. Hard to retain it all.
I know,
He's
I know.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So
Well,
we have a resource now.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's great to, have resource to, you know, and he's generous to say, you know, call them and ask them
Yeah.
questions and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. That's
When
really-
also, because he's been through it,
Yeah,
he can say, oh,
Yeah.
let me put you in touch with Mary at
Yeah,
our staff.
yeah.
Or he might say, gee, you have somebody in your town, at your town,
Yeah.
in your organization, that maybe you wanna run it by first. So,
I like
at
that.
least, my experience tells me, information is more valuable sometimes than the actual work.
yeah,
I think
Cause
you're
you
right.
can spin a lot of wheels,
Yeah,
not it being in the right direction, and somebody said, will tell you, oh, if you had just done this, it would've gone much faster,
Mhm.
so.
so let's move along to new business, and Eileen, you've done some research on small projects, and
Yeah.
And I'm also, during the meeting, hearing Lynn talk about libraries and grants and safe spaces and sidewalks,
Yeah.
so I hope you agree, let's try to nail that down then, where we're going for our
Mhm.
next
Mhm.
meeting.
Sure. One of the things that I thought of, and then I'll tell you what I actually started on that. We had talked before about having somebody print out some of those printouts that they gave us that were, you know, 42 pages long and that stuff. I'm wondering if we can still get that, because that might, as we go forward, they pointed out in that list, and somehow I can't find it on my computer. They had highlighted in a spreadsheet of things that were done or they thought would be priorities. And if we can get that printed out from here, because, you know.
I printed it out, unfortunately, it's not in order,
Oh,
some of
okay.
the documents, so I have it all.
Oh, okay.
And I'm more than happy to bring it to the next meeting and have us go through it.
'Cause that would
be
you like me
good.
to put that in the
Yeah.
agenda? So review, you know, I even made a list of exactly what they called everything. A priority for ADA transition plan, had a Hark annual report, a grant application that was put in February 19.
Oh, okay.
This Matt Hart did an RFP list, an ADA self-evaluation of the town, and Harwich Center initiative. So I have it all. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Oh, it doesn't, okay,
One section doesn't, some of the others do, but I think it's worth it.
yeah.
I'm not willing to copy it.
No.
I'm willing to bring it and then have us disseminate it and figure
Yeah.
out where we wanna go from there.
I was hoping somebody from here, because I remember there was one that was, it was colorful,
Yes.
and it had a lot of, you know, points where it was directing you to things that were needed, or things that they had completed. And so that, for me, being able to look at that again and see, you know, what direction
Okay.
perhaps feel.
Do you wanna see if you can find it? And but I
I
haven't.
tried in the last 2 days and I couldn't find it on my computer. I don't know what
I'll
happened.
look again.
And,
Okay.
or if you've got a copy that you've printed out,
I
could
do.
we have them make copies of it? So somebody
just-
in here.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Was that something you downloaded from the town?
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, Larry sent it to
Yeah.
all of us.
Oh,
No,
okay.
Larry sent it to me and I sent it to him.
Yeah,
Right, and it
It's-
went on
it's-
for,
it
And
was
it went
a-
on forever.
Electronic.
I didn't,
yeah, it was a-
I didn't
it
try
was
to
there-
print it.
yeah, it was what the previous folks did and felt, they did an assessment of the
Right.
town. And they started on some things, but
Yep.
then there were still some
So
things.
theoretically, there should be a link in the town's computer as to what that is. If you just emailed us that link, we could actually pull it up on
That
our
would be
own
good.
computers. And if we wanted to print it out, we'd print it out ourselves.
Except that it's 35 pages, you know.
Oh, it's more than that.
Yeah, but the town doesn't care about that. If
Well,
we
the
might-
town doesn't, but I do.
We might, that's correct.
I mean, I really went, looks like that.
Yeah.
So who
Maybe
do
there's a
we
copy of that around here
Yeah, who
somewhere.
do we contact? I know Ellen Powell.
I would contact Ellen, and if she does not know, she will send you the information.
All right, she's away right now, but
Yep.
I will contact Ellen Powell.
Yep.
About,
Or,
let's,
is it, who was the woman that was sitting on?
Megan.
Megan.
She'll probably say to Megan has one of those photographic memories,
Yeah.
so she'll know
so
exactly
I'll
where.
contact Ellen to get,
Right.
to, you know, Larry did send it, I had trouble finding it
Right.
again on
Yeah.
my computer, but you found it, and then I started printing it, and for some reason, do you ever have it happen, you can't stop your printer?
Oh, yeah, that's it.
And
Yeah,
I just,
I'm out
That's
of
true.
control.
That's,
so we need it again.
yeah,
Yeah.
in a way that helps us to do the work they're asking us to do.
So we have the previous assessments of
Yeah.
everything I
And
just
we,
read
and we
off.
could always, like you do, you bring your laptop. If we had that and we had it on our laptops, we could always pull it
Yeah.
up that way.
But
So
he said-
I'll
even
get another
sti-
copy from.
even still looking on, you know, my laptop is like this, but, you know, you're constantly going back and forth like this,
Yes,
and that doesn't help.
right.
It makes
All right,
it,
I'll wait till Ellen gets, I'll wait till next week
okay,
and try to get it on.
yeah.
Okay, so,
So that's, I was trying to use that. What I was hacking around, just trying to see what other states did about ADA. And I came across, there's a site from, in Massachusetts, and I think that it may be a cousin to what this fellow was telling us about. And they did have, they do have small grants. And they didn't say exactly what small meant, but there were things that you could do individually or in your town, or use the resources in the town. And it talked about the trails, because many of the trails are probably difficult for some people to utilize, and and so that would be a small project. And what I did was I called them, and all I did, I could get only I called in July, I think, the end of June, and there was nobody that answered the phone, but I left a message. And the only thing I did was I left my name and my telephone number, because I didn't want to go further about any discussion about this without the town, this committee, or the town knowing that I had contacted the state. And it sounds like we may have an avenue already. But there were things like that they talked about there. There was a whole slew of, these acronyms. And the one that I remember was the rail trail, the parks, trails. And that there could be some kind of an assessment you could do, and that they would pay for repairs. So that if there were routes where people would trip over, or there was a rock slide that had to be removed or something like that. It didn't say exactly how small the project needed to be, but we could find that out.
and what is this funding source?
It's the Massachusetts ADA, and it was small project grants, or grants for small projects. And so I thought, okay, well, here's maybe a resource
Sure.
for, the beaches or something or other, and I just don't, there wasn't a whole lot. The woman called me back and left a message. I wasn't home when the message came in, but she talked about, yes, there was money. The monies for 2023 has already, they've already submitted for that, but for 2024, then if there was something small that we talked about, like perhaps, the library issues, that may be a money source. But there again, I pulled back, I didn't call her back, simply because I didn't want to go forward without the committee thinking about that, or the town thinking about that. Because the last thing I wanted to get is a call from a selectman that said, where did you think you could get all this money from, that we have, without telling us about or something. But it still remains open to us that there's a possibility for small grants.
And the committee, here's my question. Do we get the grant and then figure out where we want to use it?
No.
Or do we find a place we want to use it and then
Yes.
apply for the grant?
Yes,
You
I
actually
think-
have to
yeah,
identify
yeah,
and you don't get, once you get the grant, then you actually go out to bid. Prior to that, you have to get some idea of what's a door gonna cost,
Right.
what's a,
Where
so you
we
have,
want to improve
you have to
X.
specifically identify what it is and why you haven't done it yet. obviously, you wanna say, we haven't done it yet, cause we don't have the money.
We don't have
That's,
funding.
there's key words for applying for grants, what
Sure.
those people look for. And, someone in that grant writing field can tell you, these are the keywords to put into your
Yeah.
document.
Exactly.
Okay, so,
So you identify what it is,
And I think that's where we are.
approximate cost, why you haven't done it, and then you submit that to the
Okay.
grant writer. Then you, once you get it, you have to go through 70B.
okay.
The procurement of it is kinda cumbersome and can take a long time just to, but that's the process.
So,
You have to
we have to-
identify the need. You identify the need, you identify it in a very specific way.
Very
This
specific.
portion of the trail in this exact location.
This
is-
many feet,
Exact, yeah.
and it
that's-
has to be totally
right.
rebuilt or only partially rebuilt. You
Yeah.
have to be as specific as you can be, otherwise,
And an assessment of the.
approximate cost,
Of the cost.
right.
Well, what-
Specifically what, how you're going to approach it in terms of what you're gonna do. How are you gonna measure if you accomplished your goal?
Well,
It
that-
just, so, but they have to know exactly really exactly what you want.
Very exact,
Before you say, pay me.
right.
You can't just say, I
They don't-
want this nice little bundle of money.
Of course, of
And then
course.
you have to document,
and-
they don't just hand you this cash and say, good
No,
luck.
No, that's why I was suggesting
Right.
that this spreadsheet that the previous committee did.
Priorities.
So look at what they assessed, and we would have to look to say, oh, if we thinking about, oh, well, this needs to be done, we'd have to figure out whether or not it's been improved already and those kinds of things. So that's why I thought
And it's just not on the spreadsheet.
or that, yeah.
Right.
That's why I thought it would be important to look at
Absolutely.
what was already done.
Absolutely.
so that's
Yeah.
what
So-
we'll put on the agenda. All right, the next agenda, we'll all have a copy or whatever, to review the previous assessments,
Yeah,
okay?
and to prioritize, the top 5
And
or
then
6
I
things.
think
and-
you're absolutely right.
yeah.
And then what are we gonna do about Lynn's library grant she's
Oh.
talking about?
Well, for one thing, the details of how to apply have not come out yet. Just a general description of it and a facts, frequently asked question section. But I'm willing to just move, I talked to Ginny once, and she was short-staffed and she didn't have time to talk to me. So I'll call her again.
Can we put that on the agenda, that you'll get back to us
Sure,
with,
sure.
is that okay with you?
Yeah,
And what are we calling that?
it's, I'll tell you momentarily.
Library grant information, because she's, right now, she's
It's,
just collecting information.
All right, so we're gonna call it library grant and.
Library transforming communities, accessible small and rural communities.
We're gonna call it library grant.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
it's specifically for
So
access.
can we have you do that?
Yeah.
I'll take care, Eileen, you've done some digging. I'll get hold of the town and see if I can get the link again that Larry sent me. That
Sure.
that-
Horrendous thing.
Whatever it is, that I've got piles of paper that make a whole lot of nonsense. Okay.
Speaking of that, by the way, even unplugging your computer, when you plug it back in, it still continues to
why-
print out the
And
thing.
it's all,
Yeah.
my laptop's very old. Anyway, can I just give you a quick report then about beaches?
Yes.
And
Oh, yeah.
ADA compliance?
That would be
You
great.
met Eric.
I had a great conversation with Eric,
He's a good guy,
and a
yeah.
lot has to do with the beaches and lifeguards. So I've been to the beaches, there are wheelchairs at the following beaches. Red River has 2. There's one at Bank Street, Earl Street, Pleasant Street, and Long Pond, on Long Pond Road, and they all have wheelchairs.
At
Now,
least one.
at least one. And there is no cost, but you need to sign a little liability waiver. like the day or two before you go. And that can be done through the parking lot attendant or the recreation department. There's another thing he's just ordered are Moby mats that with a wheelchair, a regular wheelchair can be pushed on. I said, why can't we have them down to the water rather than just, 20 feet? He said that there's a push and shove with the DPW because they clean the beaches and if the mats
Oh,
there,
yes, yes,
they can't
yeah.
clean the beaches. So he's trying to purchase as many mats as he can and he will disperse them accordingly to the above beaches that I just mentioned. And again, these beaches all have lifeguards. I just, as a point of information, asked him if he was having trouble hiring lifeguards this year. No. And
Oh, really?
I'm at Red River Beach quite often. They have numbers now on each lifeguard
yeah.
stand. And do you know that there's been a lifeguard every time I'm down there
Oh, wow.
at those beaches, even though we like to go way down to the end.
Yeah.
That's lifeguard
Chapman.
chair number 6.
The Chapman.
And there, right, and there's been a lifeguard there. I mean, not there every day, but, so I wanted to get back to you all on that.
That's largely because of error. The reason we keep personnel in this town is largely because they like working for the person they're working for. Even then we lose some. 'Cause-
Well, we have, unfortunately,
'cause-
there's two left.
yeah, but if another town's gonna offer you $100
Well,
more per week, that's a
sure.
lot of money. And
Right.
some
What's
towns are
Eric's
doing
last
that.
name?
B-E,
PEBE.
B-E-E-B-E, very nice guy.
B-E-B-E-E?
No, B-E-E-B-E is what I have, B-B.
Oh, okay.
And he's been doing it a long time, so
Yeah,
he
he
really
worked-
knows his stuff.
He worked at a facility I was involved in for a while, that's a
Oh, okay.
residential placement for people who are
Yep.
handicapped, so that was good. I have a couple of next steps, if no one minds.
Mhm.
Would one of you just, Steve, I'm gonna pick on you. Can you find out who you can go to fix that darn front door that you can't get in
Oh,
to the front door by pushing the
Yeah, that's Link.
handicap accessible?
So it's the button at the back door?
Yeah, I
Not
call
working?
it the front, but it's the back, right? It's the way we all come
Gotcha.
in.
It's the parking lot
The back
entrance.
door,
Yeah.
I'm also gonna send an email out if you're okay, between now and the next meeting, that if you can't come to the meeting, can you notify one of us?
That should apply to all of us, yeah.
Right, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna send that to the whole committee,
mm-hmm.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, please let us know.
And then we talked about the grants. We talked about next steps. Can we adjourn? Is there anything anyone else would like to discuss? I can't thank you enough, all of you. And Lynn, I feel for you today having to do those minutes.
Yeah.
I think, I'm gonna go to the online source that Steve cited and see if I can clarify. I mean, he talks fast and he knows what he's talking about, but I don't.
Exactly. So, can I make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
So,
Was that?
I made the motion.
Sure.
Oh, okay.
And Steve second, and I'm going to
Adjourn.
stop. And I'm going to adjourn.
Good to see you guys.